I figured out how to turn the volume up on the audio, so that's what we're gonna do now to make sure you can hear me. Though I'm pretty sure you don't want to hear the fan. So let me turn that off. Okay. That bitch is dusty. I gotta dust that motherfucker at some point. But this is gonna be in parts because I have like 3 minutes before I have to leave out the door. But I just wanted to start this at least. This video will be about buttons. I did like a 8 to 10 page paper on buttons. I did a presentation on the history of buttons. So now you get to hear all of my weirdness on buttons. I'll leave my sources in the description because I know how to cite my sources. I did these for papers in college. I feel like I'm not still in college, but like still. These are for classes. Like the button discussion is based off of a paper and presentation I did for a class I took last semester called Material Cultures, to which knew I was going to take that class a semester earlier, and I was excitedly talking about my advisor / the professor for that class about how I'm going to talk about buttons and how my final paper is going to be on buttons. And look at that, my final paper was on buttons because I'm obsessed with buttons. I'm going to be using my phone so I can pull up the paper that I did because I can't focus on anything if I'm excited. So I thought it would be better for me to go based off of my paper. The reason why this won't be in one straight shoot is because I gotta go to court. Because I am a witness to a robbery. And like they didn't call me to say I had to go, but they sent me a letter. So I figured I probably should go. Hence the outfit. This is the first time I'm wearing this shirt, even though I bought it a year and a half ago. Because it's the first time I can fit this shirt again. Even though I bought it a year and a half ago. Because for some reason my measurements are going down, but not my weight. And I don't know why. But it is what it is. It's not important. Anyway, pulling out the paper. First things first, I'm the realist. Fun fact, while I try to pull this up, did you know that buttons are one of the oldest material culture items found in the world? It was, yeah, it's one of, not the oldest, but one of the oldest. They were found in the Indus River Valley civilization. Like buttons dating all the way back to the Indus River Valley civilization has been found. They were more like brooches, like what we would today call brooches, than buttons as we would call it today. Like it's not like these where you would like poke them through a hole. In fact, the buttonhole wasn't invented until several like centuries, I dare say over 1,000 years later. Yeah, the button existed long before the buttonhole. How they would attach buttons is they would they would have the button, and in the back there would be like a little hoop, kind of like how this button is actually. Coming up close, kind of like this, like how this button is attached. If this was focused, like how this is, that's how they would make buttons, and they would have like a pin that would go through the hole and whatever cloth that was in, and that's how they do buttons. It's really cool. And I'm already out of time, so I'm gonna come back afterwards. I might be in my pajamas because I don't like being on my bed in my outside clothes if I've been outside. I haven't decided if I'm going to forgo that to keep the very cute fit the entire video, but you'll know like instantly. I know in a few hours. Yeah. I've returned. I need to brush my teeth, but I'm doing that just before I leave. I go back to school today, which sucks because literally days after I found out I could finally graduate, they were like, yeah, by the way, you still have 2 more classes. And I'm like, misery. But that's besides the point. I'm getting my hair done just before class, so that's why it looks like this right now. But yeah, I'm moisturized just with my skincare routine, and we're gonna go back to talking about buttons. Last we left off, I was talking about buttons in the Indus River Valley civilization, which were a lot more like brooches, closer to what we would call brooches. And it was like that all the way until Roman civilization. Ha ha ha. With the Romans, they used buttons to hold up their togas. Not for long though, because buttons couldn't withstand how buttons were at the time. You know, the big ornament that you shoved the needle through. Could not take the weight of all that fabric. It would just leave gnarly holes in the fabric, and they were like, no. So they invented something called a fibula. Is that right? Fibula? Yeah, fibula. Fibula. Probably not how those pronounced, but that's how I'm going to pronounce it. Which is what we would call.
One night that we could eat the leftovers the next night. So
why did you do that? Anyway. Ignore that. But a fibula, which is what we would call a safety pin. Yeah, safety pins were invented all the way back in the Roman times, and it kind of just disappeared for a couple centuries after it was created. Weird fun fact there. But yeah. Buttons continue to be used with the needle and hole up until the 14th century, which is the 1300s, where it is cited to be in Germany, but other cultures could have also figured out to put a buttonhole in well before this. It's just what we have in terms of information. It says 14th century in Germany. Right? Yep. 13th century Germany, where the buttonhole was created. So instead of putting a giant pin through a loop in the back of the button, you would slip the button through a buttonhole, which allowed for a lot more tightly fitting clothing, which is why you get the 14th century stiff as a board, tight fit, perfect measurements type of scenarios. That and lacing. So that's cool. There were, I feel like there's something really cool about buttonholes that I had. Alright, how we make buttonholes now in garments and how they used to make buttonholes in the 14th century are two different things. How we do it is that we stitch the fabric before it's cut and then cut the hole. Back in the day, they would cut the hole, then stitch the fabric. I can tell you for a bona fide fact, doing it the cut the hole, then stitch the fabric way is hard as hell. I speak from experience. I have had to cut buttonholes, and my intuition said cut first, then sew, and that was difficult. It was very difficult to get those edges in, to be for real. So there's that. When was buttons used? For all of these things, like all this time in history, from the Indus River Valley to the Romans to 13th century Germany, all this time, buttons were used from the rich people. It was an upper class item. This is because it was just expensive as hell to make. Like, buttons were expensive to make. You needed an expert in making buttons. You weren't making the bad boys at home. At least not the ornate ones that we have in collections anymore. They could, in theory, have been making these at home, but they would be a lot cruder and probably not as durable as the ones that the rich people got, which is why we don't have as many of them throughout time than the more ornate looking ones. That is until around the 1800s, late 1800s, early 1900s, around then, where buttons started to be made in mass in factories using clamshells and muscles, which was a lot easier to cut through than what they were using before, which was more... Did I write down what they used before? Harder materials like metals and tusk and shit like that. Things that are harder to work with. Sorry. I am also refreshing my brain with this, of my paper, because I haven't thought about anything like this in a few months. I just randomly decided, you know what would be really cool to talk about? Buttons. And here we are. So, excuse me for not having everything off the top of my head. Yeah. So, yes, freshwater pearl and clamshells with mussels. Those things were usually boiled and softened, because these were all, like, these materials were also used to make buttons at home. So we know how they did it. Boiled until it was soft. Then, like, beaten out, flattened. And then cut. Then the button shapes were cut out. The ones from the factories look a lot better than the ones at home. Usually. The ones at home look rough. But that makes sense. You're using factory machines to get precise things versus doing it at home where human error and hands are the thing that you're using. So, yeah. Politics. I might have lost you there. But buttons started to be used in politics around the 18th century, where they would have a decorative button, which is that they put on, kind of like the flatbacks that you get now. So yeah, that's it. That's, you know, buttons were used in politics. Now you know. Fun trivia if you ever want to impress your friends. Did you know that buttons were used in politics in the 1800s? 1900s. 1800s is the 1700s. In the 1700s. 18th century is 1700s. Yeah. Fun fact, United States fun fact. By like sometime in the 1900s, the US used to be the largest manufacturer of freshwater pearl buttons. I'm talking, we made 1/3 of the world's buttons. That is until, you know, the market crashed, and we don't do that anymore. But back in the day, we did that. So that's an interesting tidbit. Ready to wear fashion, like this dress, actually, ready to wear, made buttons even more popular than they were, because, you know, manufacturers needed them to place buttons on, what's it called, button-up shirts and cuffs and all that. So, you know, buttons had a little bit of a boom, you know. Yeah. Nowadays, buttons are mainly made out of plastic. You'll find some wooden buttons, that's also popular. But, yeah. I was expecting this to be a lot longer than it actually is. But giving a condensed form of this paper is a lot easier than it was writing the actual paper. that is, I think, 10 pages. Yeah. Here are some button making other materials that buttons are made of: with horns, tusk. Wooden buttons were also a thing back then as well, though not as popular from what I found. Of course, the pearl buttons. There were, what else? I think that's not it. But like ivory, celluloid, which is something you find in trees. Yeah. Fabric buttons are also a thing, but those are usually like wooden buttons or cheaper made buttons wrapped in fabric. So there's that too. Who knows? If you do reenactments and you might be familiar with making fabric buttons, and maybe I wonder if some of the how many of the dresses of the 18th century, 19th century in our museums have homemade fabric buttons. Who knows? I could probably Google it. I'm not going to, but I probably can. But yeah, that's it. Oh, I actually have pictures. I don't know if you can't see it well, but that's an example of buttons that were found in the Industrial Valley Civilization, or around that time, is what these is guessed to be aged, old as dirt. Yeah, and this is a shank button. Shank buttons, which is the most common button until the buttonhole was invented. The only button, I think, until the buttonhole was invented. It's the one with the little loop on the back. But yeah. That was fun. Thanks for listening to me talk about buttons. I might talk about more of my school projects on here because I've spent so much time on them, I might as well pull them up and use them again. Yeah. I have time until I have to go to my hair appointment, so I'm just gonna charge my phone and watch more meal prep videos, I guess. Thanks for coming with me through this. Highly appreciate it. Nice.